The classes of DrDark are now in session. I tried telling other people. They feigned sympathy. But I know all they see is the grief-stricken ramblings of a mourning sibling. It's been a while since I sat down and wrote this much. But I figured it was important to get it out there. Maybe for closure. Maybe to honor his memory. It doesn't matter. Let's get this over. I've always been fond of the outdoors. I live for the cool air blowing through the trees, the crunch of leaves underneath my feet, and the vast tapestry of stars spread out against the inky void. My brother, who I'll call Jay for this story, was pretty much the exact opposite. Calling him a recluse would be an understatement. I don't think anybody ever actually saw him since he moved out of the house, and the most I heard from him was a monthly phone call. The very concept of the outdoors was anathema to him. He also had a debilitating fear of the dark. He'd often text my mom in the middle of the night, rambling about some horrific nightmare he'd had. And he still has his blanket from when he was a kid. Most people who hear about his laugh assume it's a simple phobia, but few understand the depths of his revulsion. This, along with a plethora of other reasons, was what finally led me to a decision. Jay would go camping with me, whether he liked it or not. I would come down there and drag him out of the house if need be. I texted him. To my surprise, he agreed, as long as I picked him up from his house. Easy enough, I thought. I started up my old minivan and got on the road. His house was nondescript. Just another small, one-bedroom flat in a sea of others exactly like it. I opened the unlocked door and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the light. Every surface was washed with a glowing light that emanated from several searing white bulbs on the ceiling. Even the underside of the dinner table was lit with a high-powered flashlight. The next thing was the filth. Piles of old clothes were strewn across the floor, and a thin layer of the grease covered the kitchen. I slowly ascended the stairs to Joe's room. I didn't need to knock. It was as if he knew I was there, and he opened the door as soon as I reached the top of the stairs. He silently walked over to me. Already fairly creeped out, I decided to just get back in the car, which I did. Jay followed me just behind. We drove silently. I asked him if I could put on some music or something, and he just nodded. The rest of the 8-hour drive was more of the same. When we got there, I was so excited I jumped out of the car. We set up our tents in silence. This silence I could tolerate, however, as it was punctuated by the gentle chirping of birds. The first day went by smoothly, until night fell. We roasted some marshmallows around the campfire, almost forgetting just how quiet it was, and went to bed at around 9 or 10. Jay seemed fine, and we were in separate tents, so I didn't worry too much about it. Big mistake. As I usually go on camping trips, I woke up in the middle of the night and went outside to take in the ambient sounds. I looked up groggily and almost gasped. The stars were blinking out one by one. The tiny points of light above me were disappearing, seemingly randomly. At first, it was too small to notice, but soon patches of sky were entirely shrouded in darkness. I was about to pass it off as sleep-deprived hallucinations when I heard groaning coming from Jay's tent. I rushed inside and looked over to Jay's sleeping bag. He seemed to just be having a nightmare. As I looked closer, I noticed tiny black spots near the corner of his mouth, like specks of tar. Then all at once, a jet black liquid came rushing from every orifice on his face. I screamed like terror. I wanted to call 911, but my legs stayed frozen as more and more of that thick tar-like substance spurted from his eyes and mouth. As it touched his skin, it burned away the flesh. So by the time it was done, all that remained was a large greyish stain on the sleeping bag. I was hyperventilating at this point. I had just watched my brother die in front of my eyes, and I had done nothing. I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't help it, and I started crying. Who could I tell? They won't believe me. They all pretend to understand, but I know they'd think I'm going insane. Maybe I am. Who knows at this point? I have started keeping the light on while I sleep from that day on. I only looked once. The first time I heard tapping on my window, it was very faint and very slow. Slowly turning around in my bed, my eyes focused on the window, and I regret it now. If I just hadn't looked, so much could be different. The sight made the skin around my eyes stretch backwards and away further than they'd ever gone. My mouth widening to release the loudest scream, but no noise coming out. My pupils growing thinner until they were mere dots. My neck pushing backwards to get away. We stared for minutes. I discounted it as a bad dream. The next day, just before midnight, I clearly heard steps outside my window, like a horse galloping. I shoved my head under my blanket and tried my hardest to still myself. The tapping began. It was louder and faster than the last time. Minutes pass and the tapping stops. When I wake up the next day, I walk around to my backyard. Beneath my window were these large footprints, large enough to fit my palm, spread out with a bit of space still left. They're in front of my window, but nowhere else, as if they just came into existence. I called the cops. They arrive later that night and stand guard. The tapping never came that night. I fell asleep in peace, and a clutch of hope tells me things are going to be fine. Eventually the cops leave. I wake up in the middle of the night. It's pitch black outside. I heard loud, disgruntled tapping on my window. The tapping is much more forceful than before. I can hear the window shaking. I know something is staring at the little lump in the bed with sullen eyes. The large pit in my stomach hole told me so. I don't know why, but I'm still. It feels comfortable, I guess. A delusion telling me it can't see me if I'm just still enough. But I can't help but breathe. Then the breathing makes me rock slightly up and slightly down. The tapping stops eventually, and when I wake up, I feel like a wreck. I call the cops again, but this time they're not nearly as recipient as the last time. Things can't go on like this, I think to myself, and head out. There's a forest beside my house. It's filled with close trees, lush leaves, green and orange bushes, and tall, thick grass. I know the tapping comes from here. I know it for a fact. If I can find where the tapping comes from, I thought to myself. I put on my thick green jacket, my heavy black boots, and snatched my camera. The tracks must have been hidden, but not perfectly. I see trampled plants, broken sticks, destroyed mushrooms. This would look common in any other scenario, but to me right now, they were clues. I see a cave opening. It's a black door of air rimmed by grey, pointy stones. I hear a distant noise as I approach it. It sounds like an old man with a high-pitched voice, heaving loudly. I have never heard of anything like this before. My gut feels sick. The sound is just wrong. I take a step into the cave. My leg disappears into the cold abyss, as if the darkness bit it off. A spark of energy shoots through my body. Everything in me is begging me to not go in. I take a few steps in, and the darkness envelops me. I tread, feeling my way forward, and then my legs hit up against something, and I tumble down the cave until I hit up against a wall. The heaving turned into heavings. I could hear it all around me. I grabbed my camera and took a shot towards the noise. The flash lit up the corridor. I caught my gasp. On the floor, layers of people with horns lay asleep. Their feet are covered in goat hair. I thought to myself, damn, I got a picture. I'm getting out of here. I permanently put on the light to not step on anyone. I figured shining some light is better than stepping on them. And I slowly snuck my way out of this cave. As I was about to exit the cave, I saw a distracting light and accidentally stepped on a pebble. I heard the pebble fall down the cave and bump into something. The creature wakes up with a shriek, waking everyone else up. I sprint for my life. I'm sitting in my living room covered by my blanket and I'm shaking. I don't know what to do. They stop tapping. They're banging. They're banging on my door. They're banging on every window. Some of them are screeching. Their banging grows louder and louder. The screech is more horrible. I feel like they're going to shatter my window any second now. I'm breathing too fast, hyperventilating. It goes out and in and out. I just can't control my sleep. Just stop. Please stop. I'll remove the pictures, I swear. I hear sirens in the distance. The banging stops. I hear them running towards the forest. Thank God, I'm saved, I think to myself. My neighbor had called the cops. I fumble out to explain what happens. I can barely describe the thoughts in my head when the officer grabs my shoulder and tells me to calm down. I show him the pictures on my phone. He looks at them curiously before dismissing them as a fake. They drive away. I am not sure what to do. I don't know what they want from me. I'm sitting on my chair, staring at my window. I don't care anymore. I look them in the eyes, recognize them. I can't live the rest of my life in fear. I cannot and I will not. The clock ticks. Each second draws us closer to midnight. I feel myself want to go into bed and cover my head, but no, I won't do it this time. I'm going to look, even if it's the end of me. I swear I will look. I blink and they're all standing there. 5 large, tall, hollowed out faces staring right at me. We make eye contact, but I hold my ground. They are angry. They're showing their teeth. They bring their large rotten hands up the window. Nails that have grown for ages are on them. They bang and they bang. And for 3 minutes they're banging on my window. A sprig appears on the window like lightning. Then another one. And then the window shatters. They reach for me with their long hands and grab me, pulling me out. I scream and jerk and kick, but it doesn't matter. I am one of them now. I don't know what they did exactly, but I have changed. I am no longer human. I no longer have 5 fingers. I feel my consciousness, my humanity, fading away. I am typing this up on my phone whilst I still can. I have a warning for all of you. If you ever hear tapping on your window, don't look. Follow the rules. It's a pretty simple statement. I don't know why exactly some people can't do this, especially if the rules are reasonable. Even as a child, I was pretty obedient. Not a day goes by without me thanking my parents for instilling that sense of obedience in me, especially what happened with me and with the dancing man. The rules regarding this man were simple. No one knew exactly when he would appear, but it was always after midnight. He would rather look innocent, like a lonely man humming to himself and dancing in the late hours of the night. Rule number 1. Don't get in the hearing range of his humming. If you can hear faint humming coming from the dancing man, run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. He will leave you alone. His tune is intoxicating and lures you into a false sense of security, drawing you closer to him. Very few people have been known to escape this trance. Rule number 2. Once you get closer to him, he will ask you to dance. Do not say yes. I repeat, Do not say yes. Getting within touching distance of him is practically suicide. If he is feeling particularly energetic, very rarely in occasions, he may just grab you even if you say no. Other times, he just walks away. Everyone in the town knew about him. Everyone followed the rules. It was Saturday night. I usually never partied or went out late into the night, but I had just gotten a new job and I needed to celebrate. I went to the local bar with my best friend Julie. We had practically grown up together. Julie was a very attractive woman, and she was proud of it. She was funny, outgoing, and extroverted, not to mention extremely reckless. The extreme opposite of me. And as they say, opposites attract. Anyway, I'm digressing. Julie was never one to follow the rules. We went to the beer tavern, which was a pretty old place, and we knew everyone there since we had grown up in this town. We partied and had the time of our lives. It was around 2 in the morning when we both finally left the bar. We both lived in the same neighborhood, so we both laughed and walked the way home. We were nearing our street when we saw him. He was wearing a black suit, a black top hat, and a red tie. At first we thought he was just another drunk dancing his way home, but the very sight of him sent chills down my spine. His face was obscured by his top hat, casting shadows over his face. I could hear vague humming coming from him, some creepy nursery rhyme. I knew who this was. Julie was already making her way towards him. "Julie, no!" I yelled him. It's him, the dancing man," I hissed. "Honey, that's just a myth. Tell me, when was the last time someone saw him?" Julie scoffed, rolling her eyes. She had a point. The last reported sighting of him was many years ago, but I still didn't want to take a chance. "Julie, we could die," I begged her. She snatched her arm out of my grasp. The man grew closer to us. He was tall, abnormally tall and thin. He continued dancing. My heart was beating somewhere in my throat. I backed away from him while making one last desperate attempt to get Julie away from him. She didn't. "Would you like to dance?" he asked her. His voice was deep, terrifying, but soft at the same time. It made my skin crawl. It was like a knife trying to saw through metal, like stones smashing and rolling against each other. Julie giggled and took his hand. That's it. There was nothing I could do now. I watched with bated breath as they started dancing. The man was now looking directly up at the sky. His head was bent at a very odd angle. His face still couldn't be seen. Julie was apparently way too drunk to find that creepy. They continued dancing, and my anxiety calmed down a little bit. Maybe this wasn't the dancing man after all. Maybe he really was a myth. I watched with a smile on my face as I heard Julie laugh when he twirled her. They danced for some time. I decided to go to Julie and tell her that we needed to go home. That's when I realized I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the ground. "Julie, I can't move," I screamed. That was when the dance started picking up pace. The man was moving fast, really fast. "Stop! Stop it!" Julie yelled. The man kept going faster and faster. He finally stopped looking at the sky and slowly lowered his face to face us. His eyes were huge, bulging, almost falling out of their sockets. His face was gaunt, the thinnest layer of pale, decaying skin covering his skull. Oh dear Lord, his smile. I will never forget his smile. It was like someone had taken a knife and stretched the corners of his mouth to make it look like he was smiling. It was stretched impossibly wide, covering almost the whole width of his face. His teeth were rotten and brown. Blood dripped down his face. He was a corpse in a suit. I screamed. They were faster and faster, until they were almost a blur. and I was stuck to my spot, unable to do anything, watching them dance, horrified. I heard Julie vomit, and then something hit my leg with astounding speed, and my knees buckled. As I fell, I heard the most horrible, blood-curdling scream I had ever heard in my life. It set my nerves on fire. I looked down to see what had hit me. It was an arm, Julie's arm, ripped clean from its socket. Julie was screaming at the top of her lungs as the man twirled her around, blood spraying in all directions like a garden sprinkler. "Don't scream, let me kiss you," he cooed softly. Without warning, he opened his mouth, impossibly wide, his rotten teeth jutting out. With an inhuman amount of speed, he clamped his mouth around her lips, cementing them shut. Julie let the most dreadful, guttural, maddening scream from the back of her throat that made the hairs on my back of my neck stand up. I still couldn't move. I watched, horrified, as he slowly ripped each limb from her body, slowly, painfully, piece by piece, all the while twirling her at the same brutal, sadistic velocity. It was the most horrible thing I had ever seen, and I couldn't look away. Each time, she would let out an agonizing, heart-wrenching scream that made every cell in my body burn. It was beyond disgusting, beyond horrible to watch your best friend get tortured so badly. Hearing her scream your name and then not being able to do anything about it. Something broke inside me that day. That dance destroyed me, and I know that I will never recover from it. He kept ripping her body apart. A circle of blood surrounded us. A lot of the blood was on me. The sun was just starting to rise when he started slowing down. It was still dark. Julie was still somehow alive. He twirled what was left of her with gradually decreasing velocity, with his hands firmly wrapped around her neck. I watched as the man ripped her head clean off of what remained her torso. He had stopped humming. He just stood there, admiring his work. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was now face to face with just the shell of the girl who was there 4 hours ago. He bowed down to some imaginary audience only he could see. Then he swiftly turned on his heel and started dancing down the street. Within 5 minutes, I could see his blurred outline vanish into the horizon. The police ruled it off as a car accident. They too knew that what they were dealing with was beyond their control. Julie's death taught everyone a very important lesson. A lesson I will never forget. To just follow the rules. And whenever you see the dancing man, immediately turn around and run as fast as you can.